I would like to thank you all for showing up right now, and I'd be open to take any questions.
Paul, how are you going to keep this, how will you deal with the second issue if it comes forward? Will you be willing to work with the other side to merge your proposals?
After talking to people who have worked with MPP in Colorado and Washington, and also speaking to members of the Green Party down in Portland, we are not interested in being subjugated to MPP or the Washington, D.C. policy.
That's right.
These will be competing measures, and we will win.
Yes.
And how will you make the distinction between what you're doing and what they're doing, and/or understanding your concern about out-of-state corporate interests coming in to run this? How will you prevent that?
Well, I think the media, because you all play an important role in that, and make sure that you give us equal time as the powerful DC special interest group to explain the Maine plan. I look at all these people, upstanding members of their community, who will be able to go out and talk to their friends, to their neighbors, to their co-workers, and say why this is the best plan for Maine.
So would voters then potentially be looking at two opposing questions related to marijuana on the ballot?
They will potentially be looking at the DC plan and the Maine plan. So the answer to your question is yes.
Paul, what about the impact on medical marijuana here? That was also billed as an economic argument. You could say it's been working well. There have not been the problems the state claimed would happen. What about the people who are growing and concerned about that?
Well, I've worked for 4 years to defend the rights of medical marijuana patients and to defend the caregiver model, and I do not intend to sell them down the river now. I will continue to work with members of the medical marijuana caregivers of Maine, compassionate caregivers of Maine, Maine Green Cross, and the larger marijuana community to ensure that any plan that goes forward will not have a negative effect on medical marijuana patients or medical marijuana caregivers.
Would LegalizeMaine's proposal include anything for medical marijuana patients as far as taxes go, or would they be subjected to the same 8% tax as recreational use?
We do not plan to have anything that will affect the medical marijuana program in our bill. It is my personal feeling that medical marijuana should not be taxed, but we do not want to muddle the issues with this citizens' initiative of them involving medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. As we're on the issue of taxes, I'd like to make a very important point about why we're asking for an 8% tax that is connected to the prepared food, lodging, and liquor tax. I'd like to say that government does not have a revenue problem, government has a spending problem. We have seen taxes and regulatory burdens damage our economy, and especially our rural economy. The state should not look at recreational marijuana as its golden goose to solve its revenue issues. This is about jobs. If the tax is high, like it is in Colorado and Washington, all you will see is an underground black market. We want to make sure that the legitimate business people in the state of Maine who are involved in marijuana are not going to be at a handicap when dealing with marijuana being imported into the state from organized crime. We want to have local Maine marijuana consumed by local Maine people. And that is why we're proposing an 8% tax that is linked to the lodging, liquor, and prepared food tax.
So if your measure passes and everybody over 21 could grow their own marijuana, how would that not hurt the medical marijuana growers who spend a lot of money on their own infrastructure? People can grow their own.
It's the same thing as why you can grow your own garden, but a lot of people still go to the grocery store. A lot of it's the path of least resistance. And growing marijuana isn't that easy. Just like growing tomatoes isn't that easy. I want to point out to people that we're still human beings. Human beings oftentimes will take the path of least resistance. And so they will say, well, geez, it's been a hard day at work. I'd like to smoke a joint. I can either try to grow my own and go through the long, arduous process and probably spend a decent amount of resources to eventually have a good finished product. But it still may not be as good as the product that comes from these professional growers, people who have been doing this for years, if not decades. And when we look at the cost, some people just don't want to spend the money to grow their own marijuana. They want to just be able to go to get it from a retail outlet or from a local small farmer.
Well, Paul, will you continue to serve as the representative for the Caregivers Association? Would somebody else do that? And does the caregivers group as a whole endorse what you're doing?
I've resigned as a member of the board of directors and as the legislative liaison for medical marijuana caregivers in Maine. You're going to have to talk to their board of directors to see where they are on this policy.
Have you registered the PAC yet?
Yes, we have.
Today or yesterday?
Yesterday. And the PAC is LegalizeMaine. Miss, you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, Colorado is seeing a lot of public health problems from legalizing marijuana, specifically because of the commercialization of marijuana and the increase in the state, from poisonings of THC, people going to psychotic episodes, things like that. Does your plan have any measure to prevent the extreme commercialization of marijuana that we've seen in other states that have legalized it?
Well, that is part of our plan why we're going to have we're proposing that 75% of all cultivation licenses go to small marijuana farmers, because that'll keep the large corporate money out, that'll keep big tobacco out and big pharma out. We are also reaching out to people who are involved in the substance abuse field, and even though they may not be able to support our plan, we really would like to hear from them for the best ways to prevent some of the issues that have been happening in Colorado.
Do you see any possibility that, that LegalizeMaine will sit down with MPP and try to come up with one ballot question that would go to voters, or is that...
They can come and sit at our table, but from their past behaviors in this state and out of this state, I do not see that happening.
So technically, then, if 2 questions went to the voters, what happens if they approve them both?
That's an interesting question. I believe it would come back to the legislature where they might either try to meld them together, but I'd have to talk to someone who is more experienced in what happens when 2 ballot initiatives pass. I don't know if the state of Maine has seen that before. So we'd have 2 great things happen. We'd have legalization of marijuana, and then we'd have 2 ballot initiatives that would come out together. So it would be an adventure for all of us.
But by having 2 ballot measures that are essentially in the minds of most voters proposing the same thing, do you risk confusing your message and the message that essentially both sides have been trying to get out that the right thing to do is to legalize recreational marijuana?
I feel like our message is very different from the Marijuana Policy Project's message. Our message is about jobs, a rural Maine economic revival. We are not trying to say that marijuana is safer than alcohol. We are trying to say that this is an integral part of our Maine economy, and we need to preserve it for Mainers.
So how do you, given the way the votes went in November, Lewiston, a majority of people in Lewiston said no. So it isn't carte blanche with the people of Maine in 2016. How do you sell your argument to the people who voted no in Lewiston?
Well, we are working with people in the rural areas. I think it's been very interesting that the strategy of the DC-based group has only been targeting the Gold Coast, which is the southern coast of Maine, and has totally forgotten the 2nd Congressional District, which is in need of the jobs and where most of our marijuana economy is based. Does that answer your question?
Do you have any estimate on how many jobs would be created by the proposal?
At this point, because we're just coming out of the gate with offering this to the public and we're trying to get public input and stakeholder input, we don't have an estimate, but I can tell you that it will be in the thousands.
Paul, can you talk about where the money is coming from for this PAC?
This money is going to be coming from Maine. We're going to be talking to people who are philanthropists. We're going to be talking to people who are involved in, I guess, a lot of the supply end of marijuana. Because one of the things I want to point out is that under a lot of the plans that have been proposed by the DC groups is that they're proposing that there are very many large grows and not very many small grows that will harm the supply end of our economy. You will see our local hydroponic and agricultural stores not have the customer base because these large corporate groups can just order wholesale.
Have you secured any big donors yet?
We have secured a significant amount of funding, but I'm not willing to talk about that now.
Would you turn away money that came from outside of Maine?
We would have to talk with our stakeholders about that, but at this point, yes.
How do you expect to keep marijuana out of the hands of youth if there's been more legal access to more of it more available in the state in this past?
Substance use, including marijuana, with our youth is a cultural problem. It cannot be legislated away. It cannot be enforced away. This is a cultural issue. This is something that we need to talk about with our cultural institutions, our schools, our churches, our civic clubs, our youth centers, our families. That's the discussion that we need to have to say, it is not safe to use marijuana until you're of the age of majority, just like we're talking about other substances.
So
I think the problem that we're having right now with substance abuse is that imagine if you were 18 years old right now, living in rural Maine and coming into this economy. Where's the hope? Is there any hope that you're going to be able to stay in the area where you grew up and have a living? It's very desperate out there. And some would say it's hopeless. And this isn't the golden ticket to solve all of our rural economic problems, but it's one piece of the puzzle. And that's one reason why we want to reach out and work with stakeholders who are in the substance abuse and mental health field to make sure that any sort of initiative we craft takes that into consideration.
So are any of the taxes going to go towards any prevention efforts or anything like that? Help you not begin using marijuana? Because as we all know, it is harmful for you to start. Whether or not you're for legalization, it's probably not a good idea to use smoking pot all the time, right?
We don't believe that any money from legal marijuana should be earmarked, because all that will do is that the legislature will then look at it as a money trough. So they will continue to raise the tax to pay for programs which will have a detrimental effect on the legal marijuana market and have a positive effect on the underground marijuana market. Again, the substance abuse issues are conversations that we need to have with our children and our youth, and we need to convince them that it's their best choice to not use these substances.
Speaking from tobacco and alcohol, though, some of those taxes do go towards prevention efforts in the state. And as of right now, we're still being overwhelmed by the youth use. And this is cultural issue, obviously, but those taxes do go towards some prevention efforts. And it's never enough. It's never going to help prevention.
Well, exactly. I think you made a great point that it's never enough money to solve the problem. So we're not going to solve this problem with money. We're going to have to solve this problem as a community and as a culture. Otherwise, you can just keep throwing money in a hole. It's going to be like owning a boat. You can just keep throwing money at it, and there's always something else to do. Did you have a question?
Yeah, just one more question about the money for your organization. Is the money that you've gotten from in-state or out-of-state?
In-state.
All in-state?
All in-state.